Imagine a 45-pound briefcase that could end civilization in minutes, following the president everywhere, even to the bathroom. From being lost in dry cleaning to nearly captured by rioters, the nuclear football has a bizarre history, stranger than fiction. This isn't just about nuclear codes. It's about joyriding Soviet leaders, discharged officers, and presidents who lost their biscuit for months. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the nuclear football. Fact 1. The name comes from a nuclear war plan called dropkick. The nuclear football has one of the most recognizable nicknames in American government, but most people have no idea where that name actually came from. According to former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, who served under President John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the briefcase earned its iconic nickname from an early nuclear war plan that was codenamed Dropkick. The logic behind the connection is straightforward. In football, you need a football to execute a dropkick, and in nuclear strategy, you need the football to execute the war plan. The official designation for this crucial piece of presidential equipment is far less catchy. Military personnel and Secret Service agents refer to it as the President's Emergency Satchel, which sounds more like something you'd carry to a business meeting than the device that could initiate a nuclear war. The code name used by the military is even more clinical. They call it the black box, or simply the package. But the football stuck in popular culture because it's memorable, easy to say, and oddly casual for something so terrifying. The briefcase has been following presidents around since the early 1960s, after the Kennedy administration realized that the commander-in-chief needed the ability to authorize a nuclear strike from anywhere at any moment. Before the football existed, the nuclear chain of command was much slower and more complicated, requiring the president to be in specific secure locations to communicate launch orders. The football changed everything by making presidential nuclear authority completely mobile. Interestingly, the Russians have their own version called the Cheged, which is Russian for a type of mountain, and the French call theirs the Satchel of Death, which is significantly more dramatic than the American sports metaphor. But the football remains the most famous nuclear briefcase in the world, largely because of that simple, memorable nickname that connects America's pastime with its most devastating weapon. Fact 2. It's made by a luggage company founded for Texas oil wells. The nuclear football isn't some custom-designed military creation built from scratch in a classified defense facility. Instead, it's actually a commercially available briefcase that's been modified for presidential use. The case itself is manufactured by Zero Halliburton, a company that most people associate with sleek aluminum luggage and high-end travel gear. But Zero Halliburton has a much grittier origin story that makes it the perfect manufacturer for the world's most important briefcase. The company was founded in 1938 by Earl P. Halliburton, the same entrepreneur who founded the massive Halliburton Oil Services Corporation. He created Zero Halliburton specifically to manufacture durable aluminum cases that could withstand the brutal conditions of Texas oil fields, where equipment took constant beatings from rough handling, extreme temperatures, and the general chaos of industrial drilling operations. Those early cases needed to protect sensitive drilling instruments and important documents in environments where nothing stayed clean or intact for long. The company's aluminum cases became legendary for their toughness, and that reputation eventually caught the attention of the U.S. military and Secret Service. The specific model used for the nuclear football is wrapped in black leather to give it a more formal presidential appearance. But underneath that leather exterior is the same lightweight aluminum construction that protected oil field equipment decades ago. The briefcase weighs approximately 45 pounds when fully loaded with all its contents, including the black book of strike options, authentication codes, and communication equipment. Zero Halliburton cases have also been used in numerous films and television shows, often as props for transporting important documents or valuable items, which has only added to their mystique. The company's products have traveled to the moon with Apollo astronauts, been featured in James Bond films, and accompanied every American president since the early Cold War. But none of those uses come close to the importance of the battered president everywhere. A Texas oil field case now responsible for protecting the most consequential decision any human could ever make. Fact 3. President Carter lost his codes at the dry cleaners. Jimmy Carter, a former nuclear submarine officer who understood nuclear weapons better than most presidents, managed to lose his nuclear authentication codes in one of the most mundane ways imaginable. The biscuit, as the authentication card is nicknamed, is a small card with code sequences that the president must read aloud to verify his identity before nuclear missiles can be launched. It's supposed to stay with the president at all times, kept in a pocket or wallet, serving as the final safeguard in the nuclear chain of command. Without the biscuit, the president cannot authenticate a launch order, even if he has the football right beside him. But Carter, despite his technical background and military training, discovered that keeping track of a small card every single day for 4 years is harder than it sounds. According to multiple sources who served in his administration, Carter sent a suit jacket to the dry cleaners with the biscuit still tucked away. In one of the pockets, the codes went through the entire dry cleaning process, tumbling around with lint rollers and pressing machines completely separated from presidential custody. The incident was discovered when someone checked on the location of Carter's authentication codes and realized they weren't with him. Military aides had to track down which dry cleaner had the suit and retrieve the jacket before the codes could be recovered. Fortunately, the biscuit was still in the pocket and hadn't been discovered by dry cleaning staff, who would have had no idea what the mysterious card with random letters and numbers actually meant. The incident highlighted a persistent problem with the biscuit system. It's small, easy to forget, and can be misplaced just like car keys or a wallet. The codes are changed regularly for security reasons, but losing them even temporarily creates a gap in the nuclear command system that military officials find deeply unsettling. Carter's dry cleaning mishap wasn't publicly revealed until years after he left office, but it remains one of the most absurdly normal ways a president has temporarily lost the ability to launch nuclear weapons. Fact 4. Reagan's codes were found in a hospital trash can. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot outside the Washington Hilton Hotel by John Hinckley Jr. The assassination attempt threw the entire presidential security apparatus into chaos, including the carefully planned procedures for protecting the nuclear football and the president's authentication codes. When Reagan arrived at George Washington University Hospital, he was losing blood rapidly from a bullet that had ricocheted off the presidential limousine and punctured his lung. The Secret Service and hospital staff had one priority: saving the president's life, and everything else became secondary in those critical minutes. Emergency room personnel followed standard trauma protocols, which meant cutting off all of Reagan's clothing to assess his injuries and get him into surgery as quickly as possible. In the chaos of the emergency room, with doctors and nurses working frantically to stabilize a president who was closer to death than most people realized, Reagan's personal effects were scattered. His clothes were cut away and tossed aside, and somewhere in that pile of discarded fabric and leather was the biscuit containing his nuclear authentication codes. After the immediate crisis passed and Reagan was in surgery, military officials began asking about the location of the president's authentication codes, triggering a frantic search through the emergency room. According to accounts from people who were present, the biscuit was eventually discovered lying in one of Reagan's shoes on the emergency room floor, not in a trash can, as some reports claimed, though items around it had been discarded. The codes had been stepped on, pushed around, and completely ignored during the life-saving efforts. For those critical hours, the nuclear chain of command was effectively broken, with Vice President George H.W. Bush aboard Air Force Two and unable to access presidential-level launch authority, while Reagan's codes sat unguarded in a trauma bay. The incident led to extensive reviews of emergency procedures and raised serious questions about maintaining nuclear command authority when a president is incapacitated. Military planners realized that their carefully designed continuity systems worked perfectly in theory, but fell apart the moment real-world chaos intervened. Fact 5. Clinton lost his codes for several months. President Bill Clinton had a reputation for being casual about security protocols. But one lapse in particular sent military officials into quiet panic. According to General Hugh Shelton, who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Clinton's presidency, the president lost his nuclear authentication codes for somewhere between 3 and 4 months. The biscuit simply disappeared, and Clinton apparently didn't notice or didn't think it was important enough to report immediately. When military aides finally conducted a routine check and asked Clinton to produce his authentication codes, he couldn't find them and couldn't remember the last time he'd actually seen the card. General Shelton later described the incident in his memoir, calling it a gargantuan deal and expressing deep concern about the breakdown in nuclear security procedures. The authentication codes are changed regularly for security reasons, but they're supposed to be changed on a schedule, not because the president lost them and nobody noticed for months. What makes this incident particularly troubling is that Clinton apparently went through his daily routines, attended meetings with military advisors, and even dealt with international crises during those months without anyone checking whether he actually had the capability to authorize a nuclear strike. The system is designed with redundancy. The football contains backup procedures and there are alternative authentication methods, but the president's personal codes are supposed to be the primary safeguard against unauthorized launches. Military officials worried about what could have happened if a genuine nuclear crisis had emerged during those missing months. Would Clinton have been able to authenticate his identity quickly enough? Would the delay have created confusion in the chain of command? General Shelton noted that the incident reflected a broader casualness about security protocols in the Clinton White House that troubled military leaders. The codes were eventually replaced once the loss was discovered, but the fact that America's nuclear deterrent operated for months with compromised authentication procedures remains one of the most alarming security lapses in presidential history. Clinton was never publicly reprimanded for the incident, and it only became widely known years later when Shelton published his memoir. Fact 6. The strike options are nicknamed the Denny's breakfast menu. Inside the nuclear football sits a book that contains the most terrifying decisions any human being could ever make. Dozens of pre-planned nuclear strike options targeting cities, military installations, and infrastructure around the world. Each option has been carefully calculated by military strategists to achieve specific objectives, from limited tactical strikes to full-scale civilization-ending retaliation. But one military aide who carried the football gave these apocalyptic choices a nickname that sounds absurdly casual. He called it the Denny's breakfast menu. Colonel Robert Buzz Patterson served as a military aide to President Bill Clinton and was one of the officers responsible for carrying the football and explaining its contents to the president if needed. In his memoir, Patterson described how President Jimmy Carter had simplified the nuclear war plans during his administration, reducing the number of options from hundreds down to a more manageable list. Patterson compared the resulting strike options to ordering breakfast at Denny's, where you pick one item from column A and 2 items from column B. Mix and match until you've built your meal, except instead of choosing between pancakes and eggs, the president is selecting which cities get destroyed and how many millions of people die. The comparison is darkly humorous, but not entirely inaccurate. The strike options are organized by category: counter-force strikes against military targets, counter-value strikes against cities and industrial centers, limited options for regional conflicts, and massive retaliation scenarios. Each option includes expected casualty figures, estimated response times, and assessments of likely enemy retaliation. The president literally does select from organized lists, combining options to match the specific scenario. Patterson's Denny's analogy highlights something deeply unsettling about nuclear war planning. The Pentagon has bureaucratized the apocalypse, turning the extinction of civilization into a multiple-choice test. The options have clinical names, neat categories, and organized presentation, as if choosing between option Alpha 3 and option Bravo 7 is somehow different from deciding whether Moscow or Beijing gets annihilated first. Military planners defend this approach as necessary. When minutes matter and the president might be making decisions under extreme stress, clarity and organization are essential. But the breakfast menu comparison reminds us that we've taken the most horrific act imaginable and turned it into something routine enough to carry around in a briefcase. Fact 7. An Air Force major was discharged for asking one question. In 1975, Major Harold Herring was a decorated Air Force officer training to become a missile launch officer, one of the military personnel responsible for turning keys and pushing buttons that would actually fire nuclear weapons at enemy targets. The training program was rigorous and heavily focused on following procedures exactly as written, emphasizing speed and compliance over analysis or questioning. But Herring had a question that he couldn't shake, one that seemed fundamental to his role, belangrijk in the nuclear chain of command. During his training, he asked his instructors a straightforward question. How can I know that an order I received to launch my missiles came from a sane president? The question wasn't hypothetical or philosophical for Herring. It was practical and deeply troubling. Missile officers are trained to verify that launch orders are properly authenticated, meaning they came through the correct chain of command with the right codes and authorizations. But authentication only confirms the order came from the president. It doesn't confirm the president is mentally competent or making rational decisions. What if the president had suffered a psychotic break? What if he was drunk or drugged? What if he was acting on paranoid delusions rather than actual intelligence? Herring wanted to know what safeguards existed to prevent an irrational president from starting a nuclear war. The Air Force's response to his question was swift and brutal. They discharged him from service. The official reason given was that Herring had expressed attitudes inconsistent with acceptable standards required for personnel with nuclear responsibilities. Military officials argued that missile officers cannot be allowed to question or evaluate presidential orders because any delay or hesitation in the launch process could be catastrophic if the United States was genuinely under attack. The entire nuclear deterrence strategy depends on certainty that American missiles will launch if ordered, and that certainty disappears if individual officers start making judgment calls about presidential sanity. Herring fought his discharge, arguing that his question represented responsible concern rather than insubordination. But he lost his case. His question remains unanswered more than 45 years later. There is no formal mechanism in the nuclear chain of command to evaluate presidential mental competence before executing launch orders. The system trusts that other safeguards, cabinet members, military advisors, the vice president, would intervene before an irrational president could order a nuclear strike. But those safeguards are informal and untested. Fact 8. Nixon and Brezhnev went joyriding without it. In June 1973, President Richard Nixon hosted Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev at Camp David for diplomatic talks during the height of the Cold War. The visit was carefully choreographed, with both sides bringing their nuclear briefcases, the American football and the Soviet chiget, maintaining the balance of terror even during peaceful negotiations. But Brezhnev, who loved cars and had a reputation for spontaneous behavior, spotted a dark blue Lincoln Continental that Nixon had received as a gift and immediately wanted to drive it. Nixon, always eager to build personal rapport with world leaders, agreed to let Brezhnev take the wheel. What happened next horrified the Secret Service and military aides accompanying the two leaders. Brezhnev, who had a heavy foot and limited experience with American luxury cars, accelerated the Lincoln up to 50 miles per hour along the narrow, winding roads of Camp David. Nixon sat in the passenger seat, trying to remain calm while the Soviet leader navigated curves at dangerous speeds. The Secret Service vehicles that normally surrounded the president couldn't keep up, and within minutes, Nixon and Brezhnev had completely separated from the presidential motorcade. That separation included the military aide carrying the nuclear football, meaning Nixon was suddenly unable to authorize a nuclear strike if needed. For nearly 30 minutes, the President of the United States was out of contact with his nuclear command authority, careening through the Maryland woods with the leader of America's primary nuclear adversary. The Secret Service agents who eventually caught up with the Lincoln were furious, but Nixon played down the incident, treating it as a successful diplomatic moment that showed Brezhnev he was trusted. Military officials were less amused. The entire nuclear command system is built on the assumption that the president is never more than a few seconds away from the football. Those 30 minutes represented a gap in nuclear readiness that contradicted decades of strategic planning. What if the Soviets had launched a surprise attack during that window? What if a nuclear crisis had emerged and Nixon couldn't be reached? The incident was kept quiet for years, mentioned only in occasional memoirs and historical accounts. It remains one of the strangest moments in presidential security history. 2. Nuclear-armed leaders taking a joyride while their country's doomsday devices sat abandoned with panicked military aides somewhere in the woods behind them. Fact 9. Vice President Lyndon Johnson initially refused his football. When John F. Kennedy became president in 1961, the military began implementing new procedures for nuclear command and control, including the creation of the nuclear football system. The Pentagon decided that the vice president should also have access to a football, ensuring continuity of nuclear command if anything happened to the president. A military aide was assigned to Vice President Lyndon Johnson and arrived at his office with the briefcase containing nuclear strike options and authentication procedures. But Johnson's staff sent the aide away, returning the football without explanation. Johnson apparently didn't want a military officer following him around everywhere with a briefcase full of nuclear war plans. For someone who valued control and carefully managed his image, having a constant military shadow reminded everyone, and reminded Johnson himself, that he was second in command rather than the person actually in charge. The vice president's role in the nuclear chain of command was also somewhat ambiguous in the early 1960s. The football procedures had been designed primarily for presidential use, and extending them to the vice president was a precautionary measure rather than a well-defined protocol. Johnson may have felt the football was unnecessary or even insulting, a reminder that his nuclear authority only existed as a backup to Kennedy's primary role. There's also speculation that Johnson, who had served in Congress for decades and understood Washington power dynamics intimately, recognized that carrying a football would make him a more prominent target without actually giving him more real authority. The vice president couldn't unilaterally order a nuclear strike. That power remained exclusively with the president. So why accept the security burden and constant surveillance that came with the football? Johnson's refusal lasted until Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, when Johnson suddenly became president and the football became an unavoidable part of his life. From that moment forward, every vice president has accepted the backup football without complaint, understanding that nuclear continuity requires redundancy. But Johnson's initial refusal remains a fascinating glimpse into how even government officials directly involved in nuclear command found the system intrusive and uncomfortable. The football represented ultimate power, but it also represented constant oversight and the terrifying responsibility that came with nuclear authority, something even experienced politicians like Johnson preferred to avoid when possible. Fact 10. It came within 100 feet of Capitol rioters. On January 6, 2021, when rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol building to disrupt the certification of the presidential election, Vice President Mike Pence was inside the building, performing his constitutional duty to oversee the proceedings. What most people didn't realize during those chaotic hours was that Pence wasn't just at risk personally. The backup nuclear football was also inside the Capitol, carried by a military aide who accompanies the vice president everywhere. As the mob broke through security barriers and pushed deeper into the building, searching for lawmakers and chanting threats, the military aide carrying Pence's football was evacuated, along with the vice president, to a secure location beneath the Capitol. According to later reports, the football came within approximately 100 feet of rioters who had breached the building's security perimeter. That proximity raised terrifying questions about what could have happened if the mob had discovered the military aide carrying the briefcase. Would they have recognized what it was? Would they have tried to seize it, thinking it contained something valuable or important? The football's contents are highly classified, and the briefcase itself has security features designed to prevent unauthorized access, but it's not designed to withstand a mob attack. Even more disturbing, military officials responsible for nuclear command and control reportedly didn't know how close the football had come to being compromised until weeks later, when they watched video footage presented during President Trump's second impeachment trial. The Pentagon had assumed the football remained secure throughout the attack, but the impeachment evidence revealed just how close the rioters had come to intersecting with the vice president's emergency evacuation route. The incident prompted immediate reviews of security protocols for protecting the football during domestic unrest, something military planners had not seriously considered in their contingency. Planning. The nuclear football system was designed to survive foreign attacks, natural disasters, and assassination attempts, but January 6th revealed vulnerabilities in scenarios where domestic political violence threatened constitutional processes. Some security experts noted that if rioters had managed to seize the football, it wouldn't have given them any actual nuclear launch capability. The authentication systems require presidential identity verification and military cooperation that a mob couldn't provide. But the compromise of classified nuclear war plans and the symbolic capture of America's nuclear command system would have been devastating nonetheless. Fact 11. The Black Book is named because it involves so much death. Inside the nuclear football, alongside communication equipment and authentication codes, sits a black binder that military personnel call the Black Book. Most people assume it's called that because of its physical appearance. After all, many important documents come in black binders, but according to Dr. Glenn McDuff, a nuclear weapons engineer who worked on strategic planning during the Cold War, the name has nothing to do with the color of the cover. The Black Book is named for what it represents: an enormous catalog of death and destruction organized into neat categories and options. McDuff explained that military planners chose the name deliberately because the book involves so much death that no other name seemed appropriate. The Black Book contains dozens of pre-planned nuclear strike options, each one carefully calculated to achieve specific military objectives while causing acceptable levels of civilian casualties and environmental damage. The word acceptable in nuclear planning means millions or tens of millions of deaths, depending on the option selected. Each page represents cities reduced to radioactive craters, populations vaporized or left to die slowly from radiation poisoning, and the potential end of human civilization as we know it. The strike options are organized by target category and expected outcome, with clinical language that obscures the human cost. Option A might be described as limited counterforce strike against military installations in Eastern Europe, but the reality is hundreds of nuclear warheads destroying bases, command centers, and inevitably the surrounding cities where millions of people live. Option B might be comprehensive counter-value strike against industrial centers, which translates to deliberately targeting civilian populations to destroy the enemy's economic capacity. Each option includes estimated casualty figures, but those numbers become abstractions when you're dealing with death tolls that exceed the total number of people killed in all previous wars in human history combined. The Black Book is updated regularly as geopolitical situations change, new weapons are deployed, and military strategists refine their calculations about what level of destruction achieves American objectives. The person carrying the football probably handles the Black Book dozens of times during their service, flipping through pages of apocalyptic scenarios as part of routine briefings and readiness drills. But McDuff's explanation reminds us that the bland appearance of that binder conceals something too terrible to fully comprehend: a menu of extinction packaged as military planning. Fact 12. Reagan and Gorbachev both had their footballs in Red Square. In May 1988, President Ronald Reagan made a historic visit to Moscow for a summit with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, part of the diplomatic thaw that would eventually lead to the end of the Cold War. During the visit, Reagan and Gorbachev walked together through Red Square, the symbolic heart of Soviet power, surrounded by photographers and television cameras capturing the moment for global audiences. What made the scene particularly striking for those who understood nuclear command systems was that both leaders had their nuclear briefcases nearby, carried by military aides who followed just steps behind. Reagan's military aide carried the American nuclear football, the black leather Zero Halliburton case that had accompanied every U.S. president since the early 1960s. Gorbachev's military aide carried the Russian equivalent, known as the Chaget, which is slightly smaller and less conspicuous than the American version. For the first time in the nuclear age, the two briefcases that between them could end human civilization were in the same location, in Red Square, surrounded by thousands of people going about their normal day. The photograph of this moment shows Reagan and Gorbachev smiling and talking while military aides hover in the background, briefcases in hand, maintaining the balance of terror even during this moment of cooperation. The image captured the absurdity of mutually assured destruction, two leaders trying to reduce nuclear tensions while literally carrying the means to destroy each other's countries wherever they went. The presence of both footballs in Red Square also highlighted the differences between American and Soviet nuclear command systems. The American system concentrates launch authority exclusively in the president, with the football representing that centralized power. The Soviet system, and later the Russian system, distributes nuclear authority more broadly among military and political leadership. The Chaget doesn't give Gorbachev unilateral launch authority the way the football does for Reagan. Instead, it connects him to a command structure that requires consultation and confirmation from other officials. This fundamental difference in nuclear philosophy meant that even when the two briefcases stood side by side in Red Square, they represented different approaches to controlling the ultimate weapon. Reagan could theoretically order a nuclear strike alone, while Gorbachev needed consensus from military leadership and political officials to do the same. Fact 13. A retired football is on display at the Smithsonian. The nuclear football has been one of the most secret pieces of presidential equipment for decades, with very few photographs showing it clearly and almost no public information about its exact contents or capabilities. But if you visit the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., you can actually see a real nuclear football up close, displayed behind glass like any other historical artifact. The case on exhibit is a retired model that was used during the Cold War era, emptied of all classified materials and communication equipment before being donated to the museum. The Smithsonian display allows visitors to examine the black leather exterior and get a sense of the size and weight of the briefcase that has followed presidents for more than 60 years. What's missing from the display, of course, is everything that makes the football significant. The black book with its nuclear strike options, the authentication codes, the communication equipment that connects the president to military command centers. What remains is essentially an empty shell, a Zero Halliburton aluminum briefcase wrapped in leather that once contained the power to end civilization. But even the empty case draws crowds, because seeing the physical object makes the abstract concept of presidential nuclear authority tangible in a way that photographs and descriptions cannot. The Smithsonian exhibit includes context about the football's role in American government and the nuclear chain of command, explaining how the system works without revealing any classified details. Museum curators note that the football represents a unique intersection of technology, security, and executive power. It's simultaneously a piece of high-tech communication equipment, a security protocol, and a symbol of presidential authority. Some visitors find the exhibit reassuring, a reminder that serious systems and procedures govern nuclear weapons. Others find it terrifying, confronted with the physical reality that one person carrying one briefcase can initiate actions that would kill hundreds of millions of people. The empty football on display also serves as a historical artifact documenting the Cold War era. when nuclear annihilation felt like an imminent possibility rather than an abstract threat. Younger visitors who grew up after the Cold War ended often don't fully grasp how thoroughly nuclear weapons dominated American political and military thinking for decades. Seeing the football helps communicate that constant tension. Fact 14. Trump's football stayed active until 11:59 a.m. on Inauguration Day. Presidential transitions are carefully choreographed events with precise timing, especially when it comes to nuclear command authority. At exactly noon on Inauguration Day, the new president takes the oath of office and immediately assumes full presidential powers, including control over America's nuclear arsenal. But the 2021 transition from Donald Trump to Joe Biden created an unusual situation because Trump refused to attend Biden's inauguration, breaking with 2 centuries of tradition. Instead, Trump held his own departure ceremony at Joint Base Andrews and then flew to Florida on the presidential aircraft, which continued to be designated Air Force One as long as he remained president. This meant there were temporarily 2 nuclear footballs active on Inauguration Day, one with Trump in Florida and one with Biden in Washington, D.C. Military officials had to manage this split carefully, ensuring that Trump's football would automatically deactivate at exactly 11:59 and 59 seconds in the morning, 1 second before Biden took the oath and his football became operational. The authentication codes that Trump carried became invalid at that precise moment, rendering his briefcase inert. The military aide carrying Trump's football remained with the former president for the trip to Florida, but the case was no longer connected to the nuclear command system. Biden's football activated simultaneously with his oath of office, maintaining continuous nuclear command capability without any gap. The split location transition had been planned for weeks by military officials and Secret Service agents who ran through multiple scenarios to ensure nothing went wrong. There was particular concern about timing precision. If Trump's football had remained active even a few seconds after Biden took the oath, there would have been a brief period where 2 people theoretically had nuclear launch authority. The solution involved automated systems that tracked the exact moment of the oath and synchronized the activation and deactivation of both footballs accordingly. Some security analysts noted that the Trump-Biden transition highlighted vulnerabilities in the football system. During contested or unusual transfers of power, what would happen if a former president refused to relinquish nuclear authority? What if there was genuine confusion about who had won an election? The system worked smoothly in 2021 because Trump, despite refusing to attend the inauguration, accepted the transfer of power at the constitutional deadline. Fact 15. Chinese security guards scuffled over. When President Donald Trump visited China in November 2017, the trip was carefully planned as a diplomatic showcase, with Chinese officials rolling out elaborate ceremonies and hospitality to demonstrate the importance of U.S.-China relations. But behind the scenes, a brief physical confrontation highlighted the tensions inherent in protecting the nuclear football on foreign soil. When Trump's entourage arrived at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, Chinese security officials attempted to block the military aide carrying the nuclear football from entering the building. The Chinese guards, who were responsible for controlling access to the building and maintaining security for Chinese leadership, saw an unknown American military officer carrying a black briefcase and tried to stop him at the entrance. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Chinese security personnel physically blocking the aide's path and American Secret Service agents immediately intervening to protect the football. According to witnesses, there was pushing and shoving as American officials insisted the military aide must accompany the president, and Chinese guards maintained that unauthorized personnel could not enter. The scuffle lasted only moments before higher-ranking Chinese officials realized what was happening and ordered their security team to stand down. But those few seconds of confusion demonstrated a fundamental problem with the nuclear football. Foreign security services don't always recognize it or understand its importance. The black leather briefcase looks unremarkable, and the military aide carrying it wears a standard uniform with no special insignia indicating they're carrying nuclear launch capabilities. Chinese security was doing their job by questioning an unfamiliar military officer trying to enter a secure facility, but their standard protocols collided with American nuclear command requirements. The incident raised questions about how the football is protected during presidential travel overseas, where American security forces don't have complete control over the environment. Military officials and Secret Service agents must coordinate with foreign security services in advance, explaining which personnel must have unfettered access to the president at all times. But language barriers, cultural differences, and the classified nature of the football's contents make these advance agreements difficult to implement perfectly. Trump reportedly was not involved in or even aware of the confrontation until afterward, as it was resolved before reaching the president's attention.